And so what we would like to do now is we would like to move on to the next item in the agenda. And again, everybody's welcome to stay for the discussion. For this discussion, we have some distinguished guests, including Bob Becker, Colin DeVries, Bill McCluskey, and Andy Schatz. And they will help us to better understand and to help with the discussion about the bylaws that are proposed for changes on the national level. I want to note that Colin needs to sign off by about 8 o'clock. So what I'd like to do is invite each of those 4 people to start by making some brief opening comments, and then we can get into a dialogue with them about these proposed changes. We've got about a half an hour that we can cover this. So what I'd like to do is, if it's okay, well, who would like to go first? Perhaps we should. All right, well then let's go to Colin, since he's got the time limitation, and then we'll go to the other folks.
Hey, Randy, thanks
Colin, you're on mute. Okay, there you go.
Hey, sorry, my internet is a little weak here too. Thanks for the opportunity here. Kind of feel like I'm a little bit in the lion's den here because this is Bob Becker's turf. I know that we have different opinions about how this change will impact the society, and that's kind of what I want to express here. I don't really have any prepared remarks, but part of what I think that this proposal to change the bylaws as it relates to delegates in particular, there are other changes, but I don't think that we'll use the time to talk about them now. The change here, I think, is a incremental step, whether intentional or not, to move away from chapter power and shift to communities. And that is, it's happening with a small change to the bylaws now, which I do think has a major impact, but and you might hear Andy and Bob minimize the change and say, oh, it's not going to affect anything but the convention, et cetera. But I don't agree with that. I think I'm not alone in that. I think that a lot of Region 1 leaders that I've spoken to are afraid of how the long-term impact will affect membership. A lot of us have been introduced to SPJ through our chapters, whether it be universities, campus chapters, or professional chapters. And if we weaken that structure even a little bit, it's not a good future for SPJ, in my opinion. And I think that as we look ahead, we may not see the impact within a year or two if these changes pass. But as more communities are added and more national bodies are added, it'll continue to divide leaders from chapters to communities, because not all of our volunteers. Look, I'm a chapter president now. I know how hard it is to run a chapter and how important it is to have engaged members and engaged leaders. And when you're dividing their time between communities and chapters, it's just a competition that we don't need. And I think that is a serious thing that will affect SPJ as a whole. And part of that is affecting our ability to advocate for journalists on the ground. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. So let's go next to Bill, and then we'll go to Bob, and then we'll go to Andy. And hopefully, if the 3 of you can summarize your concerns quickly, and then we can have a dialogue among the 4 of you, and open it up to the floor as well.
I'm a member of the Bylaws Committee, and I can assure you that I don't recall any discussion of, quote, moving away from chapter power. I don't recall that issue being raised. No one raised the idea of weakening chapters. I've seen no weakening of chapters since the communities were first invented. It seems to me to give more people a better way to participate in SPJ, to become familiar with SPJ.
Bob, go ahead.
Yep, there is absolutely no intent to weaken chapters. in this, and these amendments don't weaken chapters. What they do is they give more members different opportunities to engage directly with SPJ. Colin, because he lives in the Northeast, isn't aware of the problems that have existed for decades in the West, where chapters have always been far apart. And it was hundreds of miles for many of our members to go to a chapter meeting. So they just didn't join chapters. That's true now in the East because there are far fewer chapters in the East than there were 20 years ago. And the issue here is those people aren't chapter members. They are about 40% of the membership of this organization. They aren't going to join chapters. So we need to give them a way to engage with SPJ, because people who are engaged with the society will renew their dues. If they don't feel engaged, they won't. And so this is a way to do that. There are many people who have, as Colin knows, in the freelance community, for example, about 145 of the 255 or 60 members are also chapter members. So they're participating in their chapters. But the community has brought a lot of people into SPJ in the past few years. In fact, this year, the two communities combined have brought as many people into SPJ as the two largest chapters, the Deadline Club and the Headline Club. And so SPJ is benefiting and being stronger because the communities are there.
Andy, go ahead. The floor is yours, and then perhaps we can have some dialogue and Colin can respond, and we can also bring in other folks on the board who want to talk about this. I know also that so far we've just been talking about this one particular bylaw change, and that appears to be where most of the heat is. I don't know whether there are others that perhaps might be of concern as well, but the floor is yours for a few minutes so we can continue the dialogue while Colin can still be with us today.
Okay, great. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. We do have a whole series of bylaws proposals, but for whatever reason, this one is creating the most light. But I think it's important to actually look at facts of what are happening here, not the speculation and the fears, because they tend to be actually overblown. I just want to talk a little bit about numbers. There's this concern that there's a zero-sum game here, that somebody will be drawn away, lured away from one chapter, put into a community, and now you have a power shift. Actually, no such thing is going to happen. This is not about people leaving their chapters. The chapters will still continue to have the same number of people. What we're talking about is people that belong to more than one entity. This already exists now. I was a member of 6 chapters in my region, and then I had to declare which one would be my home chapter. Colin, what's not true? You said something's not true.
So the bylaws proposal forces the choice of, when it comes to counting delegates, whether you minimize that or not, when you're counting the delegates, you have to choose whether you're represented by your chapter or the community. That's what you propose.
Excuse me, Andy, for a minute. Can I say something? Because I know what the bylaws say.
Yeah.
No such choice is forced, Colin, and you know that. It says by default, you're assigned to the chapter where you live. If you want to change that because you're a member of 2 chapters, you have to tell headquarters that you want to change. That is the facts. That's how it's done now. And that's how it will be done in the future. Nothing changes. No choice is forced.
Yeah, so the idea that, one chapter is going to have 200 members and then their members are being siphoned away, it's just not true. They still belong to the chapter if they want to. I'm a very strong chapter advocate. I was a chapter president for 3 years. I believe chapters are where people enter SPJ and make their impression. I would do nothing to undermine that. What we're talking about is representation. This all boils down to power. And if you really want to boil it down, it's probably to one delegate vote. If you are a chapter with 200, let's just say you have 180 members. Chances are, at most, you're going to get a handful of people who are in belong to more than one entity. and they declare, no, I'm going to move to this one instead. As a result, that chapter loses 0 delegates, 0. Nothing changes. What happens is that the community now gains 5 people that they can count. They gain a vote. So before there were 3 votes plus 0, now there's 3 votes plus 1. This is an expansion, and it's a move toward equality. So if you were to start SPJ from scratch, how would people affiliate with each other? We see it loud and clear during the pandemic. They will often affiliate electronically, but through topics, through connections, through things that interest them. How many of us are in a whole bunch of Facebook groups because we have common interests? It makes sense. The chapters and the communities are doing nothing different from each other. They're just connecting in a different way, except for the fact that they might meet in person or not. If we're going to boil it all down to, well, you better meet in person or you're less than equal, that's pretty weird to me. I think that the communities are doing great work, bringing people in who would not be in SPJ otherwise, and they should be treated with respect and equality. And that's what it boils down to. 1 delegate vote. This is what this is all about. Thanks.
Can I respond?
Sure.
So, Bob, I know you wrote the bylaws. The home choice is in there, though. I mean, the language is in there.
Language is in there. The language is in there so that if a person wants to change from the default to something else, the person can change.
Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at is that, number one, a lot of chapter leaders think this is bad. This is a bad move, and they weren't included in the conversation. And that's when the convention comes, there will be a move to try to table these amendments because we need more time to go over them and discuss them. No one has ever said communities are not a good thing. That's never been a debate at all. Communities are great. I promote them all the time as Deadline Fund president. I refer to the freelance community resources, which are wonderful and awesome. And I wish more of that kind of stuff was being created by other groups. But what we're proposing here is not constructive for the society. Many other people that I've talked to feel similarly, and that's really where we are. And if we want it to be a more inclusive process, to really not just look at delegates for communities, but also the unaffiliated delegate system, which I know you shared a memo from.
Wait. If we could just talk about communities for a minute, since you brought it up. I have a couple of reactions to what you've said, Colin. First of all, if you want freelancers to continue to make the resources that we spend gobs of time creating for freelancers and for SPJ, then you have to put them on a level playing field. You have to accept them as equal. There are not, and I'm guessing the same would be true for the international community people, but I won't speak for Dan and Al. But so that's an important thing to think about. I know people who are very active in the freelance community who are, and I'm not talking about myself, people who are stinging from this conversation going on right now. I know people who say, if you try to force me to join a chapter that is miles and miles and an hour's commute from my home office, I will leave. I think that it is important that you think about how welcoming you are being to people who are otherwise marginalized anyway.
I'd say Hazel, I respect that, and I'm sorry that that's what it's come to, but this is what we have been presented, that we have to act
No,
on.
you are the one.
Wait, I'm going to call, hold on. No raising voices. Let's keep this civil, please.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
It's
Colin,
just,
you are the one who made it contentious like this. It doesn't have to be. We can work together. The freelance community has offered time and again to start groups like the DC Pro chapter monthly group, or however often they want.
so
We
Hazel,
have offered our resources.
I have to go, but
Nobody has taken us up on them.
I have to go, but like it was never anything against the freelance community. It's about SPJ, Hazel. It's not about the freelance community or any community. It's about SPJ and the
It is
future
about
of SPJ.
It is about SPJ. And for the chapters to feel that they need to maintain power over the organization, which is changing and evolving over time, and not share power with the newcomers is a mistake. That's my feeling about how SPJ figures into this.
So the unaffiliated system does exist. I think it needs work. So everyone has representation, whether they're in a chapter or not. How effective it is another question. And I think that should be worked on as well. So, I have to go, and I'm in the minority here. I'm the only one on my side and whatever. So that's why it's like, I'm in a whatever, but so it's not turf per se, but I'm in the minority. It's speaking for this point of view. So
I would just like to thank Colin for agreeing to attend this meeting. I really appreciate your perspective and to come here. And thank you very, very much. I know that you have to leave. Let's call on Andy next, but thank you
I'll
very
just
much.
say something real quick. We talked about civility and the need to, again, work together without attacking each other. I've heard and seen from a number of people who are offended by the idea that opponents are just going to throw anything out that sticks and impugn Bob Becker's reputation, saying he's just doing this because his wife is. That's really going beyond the pale. I think we can debate and disagree, but not to go after people's motivations and characters. So I think it's important to really keep it civil.
So let's open it up to further discussion among anybody else who is on the call right now.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't really care about where the delegates are, but what does concern me and what I'd like some clarification about is, okay, I'm a person, I'm new to an area. Say I join SPJ and I'm new to DC, okay? Do I have the choice of joining a chapter or a community? And if I join a community, which is a perfectly legitimate choice, do I pay dues the way I do to join a chapter? And I know that there is some language about that in, I think, the revised proposal, but mostly I'm trying to figure out the financial structure of this.
Okay, I think I can answer that. Most chapters charge dues, some do not, okay? The communities at this point do not charge dues. That's a choice they've made. They may, at some point in the near future, say, we need some money to do programs or do projects, and then decide to charge dues. So whether you would pay dues to a community or a chapter in your area or the community depends on whether that entity has decided to charge dues, okay? The other question, the bigger question is, what happens when you move to a new area? If it's served by a chapter, you can choose to join the chapter, or you could choose to join the community, or you could choose to join both, okay? And that, nothing will change about that. At this point, most people are members of one chapter. I think when I looked at the data, about 70 people in the organization out of almost 6,000 are members of multiple chapters. And for them, the default is that they are considered for voting purposes members of the chapter where they live. If they want to be counted where they feel their family or their affiliation is, they can change that by telling headquarters that that's what they want to do. Nothing will change if the communities are given access to governance in this organization. Does that answer your question?
Well, to a certain extent. I've been in organizations, both in the nonprofit world, in organizations both with strong chapters and in organizations with no chapters. So I know that they both are useful. It's hard to kind of conceptualize how you have both communities and chapters and what the relationship is between them. And
communities are
financially how
geographic.
it works in terms of, if a community and a chapter are both charging the same amount of dues, I can see that one does not have a financial advantage over the other necessarily. I mean, I'm not against communities. I think they're great. But I think SPJ has a larger question to actually address and resolve. What is its future? Is its future in communities or is its future in chapters? And I don't know the answer to that. But I do think that it's important to get that larger question kind of explored because I think it's important.
Okay, let me try and answer it. May I just
yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go to Stephanie after that.
Okay, communities, chapters are geographically based. If you live in Washington, in Washington and its surrounding area, your presumed chapter is the DC Pro chapter. Communities are professional interest based. They're like the American Bar Association sections, okay? They are not mutually exclusive. They serve two different purposes. And there are a large number of people who would prefer to join one rather than the other. So we've been having this discussion since 2012, and we have a clear idea of what the two entities are and how they should work, okay? But I think we need to move on to Stephanie.
First of all, I think the really big concern in our chapter has been that you do not get put into the DC chapter if you join national. We have many members who are national members and are not chapter members. They choose not to be affiliated or they don't know they can be affiliated. I've been calling people this week trying to get more people to actually become a DC member. I think that's one of our really big problems. I've talked to people who thought they were members of the DC chapter. They are not on there. So I think we have a separate problem with that. I happen to be glad that everybody's fighting about this. I think we do have to decide where we go as an organization and how much it is chapter based and how much it's community based. We're getting kind of nasty and fighting, but that seems to be what we do. I want to take this to the delegates. I want us to vote for us. If we have to table it and come back again and vote and work on it till we get it right, that should happen.
Selma, you have your hand up?
Yes. So I'm noticing something, and it's something to consider. Maybe this large group of unaffiliated members within SPJ, I mean, it's reflective of what's going on in our society. For example, in the voting world, there's a large group of people who choose to be independent.
Selma, your screen has frozen.
And in regard, oh, sorry, the internet's unstable. So what I'm saying is, in our society, we have groups of people who are unaffiliated in specific categories. When you vote, there's the independent group, and in religion, there are the nuns, NONES. So why not have a similar category for SPJ? Something to consider.
Deanne, you have your...
Yeah, go ahead, Deanne.
I'm less confident in the language, but I'm very confident in why I'm a member of SPJ, and it is because of the freelance group. I came in because I heard about the lunches at the National Press Club, and Stephanie and Hazel and everybody was very welcoming. And it took a while, but eventually I found out about the chapter. It wasn't where I started, but my observation, especially having been on the programming committee, not most recently, but before, is that the communities are stepchildren. And though people mean well, and though there's enormous opportunity for the organization as a whole, I offer the observation that having been involved with this, I think there's a willingness of SPJ National to better incorporate the communities, but perhaps this change is necessary to give the communities a bigger voice. And not because it's taking away from the chapters, but because the opportunity is in the communities.
So we've got about 5 minutes left to discuss this. So I wanted to, we'll get to Andy next, and I think Bob wanted to say a few things. But first, I just want to say that one thing that we should also be talking about in the next 5 minutes or so is what, if anything, should our chapter do regarding this bylaw, and we're only talking about this one, we're not talking about any of the others, when it comes to voting on it. Go ahead, Andy.
Okay, thanks. The question about unaffiliated is kind of a vexing one that we never will probably get a strong answer to. It's just part of the nature of being a member that a lot of people will pay their membership and support the organization, but really have no other interest in connecting, or they don't have a local chapter, or they don't have time, or they don't want to spend money if their chapter charges dues. That's okay. We do have a large percentage, 41%, but this speaks to the idea of why the communities matter and why the delegate representation there makes sense. To go back through the Slack channel, the argument, they don't need representation in the communities, they can do it as unaffiliated. And yet the same person is saying, and yet the unaffiliated system's broken. But those two things don't mesh. I will tell you that there's some challenges to unaffiliated, but most people who are unaffiliated don't even know there's such a thing as being a delegate. They're not connected to anybody. So telling them to just go out into the void and that's your representation is the opposite of what we should be doing. The communities create connection. They create connection over specific ideas, and then those ideas can be represented through governance. It all makes perfect sense, but there's a power struggle going on here. It just refuses to see it in inch. And we cut all through it. That's what's going on.
Stephanie, you had your hand up? Or Bob first and then Stephanie, I'm sorry.
Yeah, one of the big reasons we have so many unaffiliated people is distance between chapters. When I became a professional member of SPJ in 1970, there were 3 chapters in Virginia and the chapter in DC. There was a Tidewater, Virginia chapter, a Richmond chapter, and a Roanoke chapter. Only the Richmond chapter and the DC chapter survived. If you are a journalist in Roanoke, the nearest chapter is 3 hours away from you. If you're a reporter in Norfolk, which is the largest metropolitan area outside of the Northern Virginia part, it's an hour and a half to 2 hours to Richmond. So lots of people don't join chapters because they get no direct benefit from it.
Stephanie?
Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm still busy typing to Bob that it is the Virginia chapter, not the Richmond chapter.
Well, I understand.
Hey, there are a lot of people in Virginia Beach. It is not the Richmond chapter. I think of this looking on it as a regional coordinator. I have to go out to people not only in Washington and in Virginia where people are active, but in places like North Carolina where we do not have a chapter at the moment. To people in Delaware where I think we will probably never get a chapter again. I want as many ways to reach those people as possible. I want to be able to reach them through chapters. I want to be involved more on the regional level, particularly since we've been able to do Zoom things. Bob, you have talked a great deal. I am not sure you've got me convinced yet that we are not putting this into a power struggle. with all the numbers and are you a delegate here, are you a delegate there? I am not a bylaws person. I'd like to have somebody explain a little better to me how it is not going to end up being freelancer versus community. I don't think we've done the very best job yet of working with
We
that.
said what we started, the goal we set for ourselves was to make the communities equal to chapters in every way possible. Chapters have delegates. So we're saying communities should have delegates as well, because, and chapters should, if you look at the bylaws, there are only 2 places in the bylaws that the word community appears right now. They say that a person who has been the leader of a community is qualified, as a chapter president is, to run for the office of president of the society. Okay? And so the only places that the word community shows up in the bylaws now is in the context of qualifications to be an officer of the society. For chapters, there's a whole structure about how the chapters are formed, how they operate, their relationship to national, and how they die. What happens when they go defunct? There is nothing in the bylaws about communities at all. These amendments, the bulk of these amendments, do that. They make chapters and communities equal in terms of the operating structure of the society. That's the first thing. The fact that communities have delegates, or would have delegates, is to give them an equal say with chapters in how the society operates. For those of you who don't know, when these amendments were proposed, they came before the board, and the board had a motion before it to either send these amendments on for consideration by the delegates. The board only had 8 members there that day and split evenly, meaning that the motion to send them on to the delegates failed. And so they did not go. The only way they got to the delegates was that Andy and some other people rounded up 18 chapters whose boards voted to allow this debate to happen. So if the bylaws say that if 10 chapters agree on an amendment, even if the board refuses to do it, those chapters can get it before the delegates. Communities don't have the ability to get anything before the delegates because they don't have a say anywhere. What we are trying to do here is, in that context, is say, if 10 chapters and or communities agree that an amendment is needed, they can get that amendment to the delegates, even if the board refuses to do it. So this isn't a power struggle. Nobody is being forced to choose sides between communities and chapters. As this is set up, if a person comes into the society through the community, let's say the freelance community, several of your members in the community joined SPJ because of the community. Okay. And under these bylaws, if that happened, those people would be counted as community members initially. They might then join a chapter. They would still be counted as community members unless they tell the chapter to tell the headquarters they want to be in the chapter. And Randy wants me to shut up.
No, I don't want you to shut up, but let's go to Stephanie first, and then we really need to wrap up in a few minutes. So I'd like to hear Stephanie, and then if anybody else can just wrap up, I'd be particularly interested in hearing from people who haven't spoken or who haven't spoken very much, but we really need to wrap up within just a couple minutes. So go ahead, Stephanie, and then I'm going to keep everybody on a quick time leash here.
Okay. Quick, Bob, I know that we got this to the floor by getting the various chapters to do it. I'm the one who bothered poor Julie Asher out in Denver to get a vote. What I'm looking at is theoretically, if all of the members here who are also members of the freelance community decided that we chose the freelance community, me, Deanne, Hazel, Jackie, possibly Catherine, we could theoretically change the balance of the DC chapter. I don't see it happening, but I think we have to acknowledge that we have many members who are now DC chapter members who could choose to move and say, DC is no longer my default. I am a community member. And I think I know some
Right.
people who will do that.
Mhm.
I don't know that it is likely. I don't know if it throws the balance off completely. I like to acknowledge for the people who are desperately trying to keep chapters alive, that that's a concern. And I'd like to be sure that that concern is addressed.
Okay, and in this chapter, you probably
Well, let's,
have
I'm sorry,
the
let's
most-
just see if other folks also want to get in here to talk.
yeah, okay.
Is anybody else? Otherwise, we'll go to Bob. Anybody else want to raise their hand? And okay, we'll go to Bob and then Stephanie, and I guess that'll wrap up unless anybody else wants to say anything further. Okay,
Probably the DC chapter has the most number of people who are members of more than one chapter as well. And if those people who are members of more than one chapter who live here because they work in the Washington Bureau of the paper or the broadcast operation they work for, were to say, oh, I want to be in the chapter where I live, that now can upset the balance. The only time I think there are only about 4 of you who are in the freelance community who are members of this chapter. 4 or 5, I think, is what I saw.
No.
Who are members. Well, I
Well,
can't.
members
All I
of
can
this
tell.
chapter. I'm sorry, we've gotten a lot of people in. I've just went through the list tonight. We have a good number of people who came in through the freelance community. I'm really proud of that. I don't
Okay.
want
No,
to
but I'm
say I
saying-
understand why there's concern on the part of the chapters. That's all.
And I do too, but the only time that it's going to be an issue in terms of one vote lost here or there is when they are close to 50 or 100, just over 50, just over 100, just over 150. Okay?
Mhm.
Because if you have 50 members, you get 1 delegate. If you have 51 members, you get 2 delegates. If you have 99 members, you have 2 delegates. Okay? So
We have 113 members in this chapter. We could lose 13 members, just theoretically. And I'm not arguing against communities. Theoretically, we could lose a delegate.
Theoretically, you could. Okay? You could lose a delegate. So you would have 2 instead of 3. And
We used to have four.
okay, I understand. But I remember when we had 7
I do too.
before they stopped counting everybody in the area as a member for delegate purposes.
I remember when we
Okay.
counted dead people. Okay.
Okay, but that's not, it is, can it
the
happen?
good old days,
Yes,
right?
but it can also happen to the communities too. It can happen the other way.
I'm not saying that I don't want communities represented. I'm saying I want the people who are fighting for the chapters, may not always be logical, but people are fighting desperately to save chapters, and I understand that.
I understand
So-
that too. But what they don't acknowledge is how hard the board of the freelance community works. That the freelance community board works at least as hard as the Deadline Club board to
So what I'd like-
maintain their entity.
What I'd like to do is if anybody else has any closing thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. Anybody else who hasn't spoken, Deanne, and then does anybody else, Deanne, Bill, anybody else? Okay, so we'll go Deanne and Bill, and then we'll wrap it up.
I just want to echo what Stephanie was saying. I'm an officer of the chapter. I don't want to see anything happen to the chapters. As I listen to this, I'm really beginning to see where the anxiety sits. And I would like to suggest that as this chapter, I think we work particularly well because we have so much overlap, and the chapter supports the freelancers and the freelancers support the chapter. But it not necessarily going to be that way everywhere. And we really need to think in this chapter in particular, but the organization as a whole, because the situation we're in DC, I think is rather unique. And maybe I'm myopic about it and very chapter focused, but I'm a little concerned. I don't have a way to articulate that, but that concern is there. I can see it both ways. I really can. And for those who are discussing this and arguing about it and passionately, I wanted to say that out loud. Thank you, Randy, for the chance.
Sure, and let's give the last word for this particular discussion to Bill McCloskey.
We argued for a long while about one member, one vote. We got there and it seems to be working well. Either way this goes, one member still has one vote. They could vote as a community member or vote as a chapter member. One member, one vote.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm so pleased that we had so many experts online with us. I really want to thank Bob, Bill, Andy, Colin, all the other board members who've been online, all the candidates for office who stuck with us through the end of this meeting. I'm very appreciative and thank you so much. I think that the board will probably discuss this a little further among ourselves prior to the SPJ 21. And with that, I'd like to thank you again, and I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
And can somebody second that?
I second it.
All right, can I have a vote all in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Anybody? This is my favorite question. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, with that, we adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much, everybody. Be well, and we'll look forward to being in touch with you and seeing you again soon. Thank you so much. Have a good night.